Well, I think we're live. I think we're just about live. Just wanted to actually kick this off just a minute or two early to make sure the audio's good and the video's good. So hopefully Heather is with us and can give me some feedback on that so that we are being heard. And we'll just give everybody a minute or two to assemble, get logged in, and then we'll get started talking about what's going to be a very interesting topic today, and I'm excited about it. Let's see. Look at this whiteboard, but not too closely. I've never done a live stream with a whiteboard before, so if it looks a little bit crazy, cut me some slack. There's a learning curve with this, and don't worry about being able to read the small print. Mostly it's there to remind me what to say. Oh, good. Heather says that she can hear me loud and clear. And in addition to that, hopefully we're streaming live to both YouTube and our Facebook page. But it's really beyond my control at this point. So I know we're streaming live somewhere because Heather can see it and hear it. So let's get started. Who am I? I'm Dr. Bruce Crawford. I am a board certified urogynecologist. I created this thing called the Pilates method in coordination and cooperation with the great Heather Dibke, exercise physiologist extraordinaire. We continue to endeavor to help people understand the relevance of the pelvic floor, how it affects quality of life vis-a-vis bladder function, bowel control, sexual response, pelvic organ prolapse. All of these things are of keen interest to our female listeners, but men have pelvic floors too, and men develop pelvic floor disorders as well. And so at Pilates.com, which you should all be visiting just on a regular basis, and we have courses for men and we have a course for women that only takes a couple of hours, and will give you a custom program so you can get your pelvic floor back in shape, right? So you can brag to your friends that I have a pelvic floor of a 17-year-old. And that's pretty happy news if you do, because your bladder will work well. You won't develop prolapse. Sexual function will be enhanced. All good things. So check it out. Pilates, Pilates.com. That's where you need to go to get your pelvic floor back in good operating condition. Now, I have been on a little bit of a rant lately. I realize that I've been on a little bit of a rant with respect to the autonomic nervous system. And I'm 100% convinced Heather and our marketing team think I'm out of my freaking mind, because it seems off base. It seems off target. Focus on the product, right? Pelvic floor rehabilitation. But you see, this is the backstory. This is the why behind the if, right? If your pelvic floor is not working properly, the autonomic nervous system determines why you will have problems with your bladder or with bowel control, etc. And so I think if we can help people to understand this, and I know you can understand it, you will be well impressed and also interested in doing what you can do to slow down neural aging. Neural aging bad. This is something that, yeah, it's inevitable. We're all going to lose this fight, obviously, but we try and push out our functional lifespan, right? So that it's not just about how long we live, but the quality of life while we're alive, right? We want to be powerful and vital and able to live with dignity and independence for as much of our lifespan as possible. To do that, we need health span, and to have health span, you need neural health span. A great deal of the bad stuff associated with aging, I know you know what I'm talking about, has to do with neural aging, neurologic aging. And so let's dive into this thing and start from the basics, describing the nervous system. And I know that's the right place to start because I put a big red 1 by it over here. You see, there's a system at play. There's 5 points we're going to make. Point number 1. The nervous system is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, denoted CNS, PNS right over here. In addition to that, there is a description of the peripheral nervous system that divides it into a somatic wow, this is hard to do, it's backwards. Somatic component and an autonomic component. We're very familiar with the somatic side. It's what we use to move around. When we're in the gym, all the work we're doing is somatic work, right? Trying to get bigger, stronger, faster muscles. And all of that is good. Heather says the whiteboard is blurry. Well, I'll tell you what it says then. I'm sorry if it's blurry. We'll try and improve that. It's just crystal clear from here when I'm looking at my screen. So I don't know why it's blurry. I'm sorry about that, though. I'll tell you what it says. So the somatic nervous system gets a lot of attention, more than it should. Why? Because the other component of the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, is what pretty much determines everything other than movement. It is what controls all of your bodily functions, the function of your internal organs. It's what determines your heart rate and blood pressure, how well your gut peristalsis, and how well your bladder works, sexual function, bowel control. All of these things are mediated by the autonomic nervous system, which is a self-regulating system. You don't have to think about it. What happy news. What happy news that you don't have to worry about adjusting your heart rate every time you exert yourself or exercise. We wouldn't have time for anything else if we did. No, it's a self-regulating system, and it does that by having 2 components that oppose each other. There's a sympathetic component and a parasympathetic component. They tend to do opposite things. So the sympathetic side would increase the heart rate. The parasympathetic side would slow the heart rate down. The sympathetic side would increase blood pressure. The parasympathetic side would tend to slow or lower your blood pressure. And wherever your blood pressure is, or wherever your heart rate or respiratory rate is the net effect of how much sympathetic input there is to the organ versus how much parasympathetic input there is to the organ. And that generally works pretty well until it doesn't. And there's a few different things that can cause the nervous system to decline in function, right? And problems follow when that happens, right? And it's true for both the somatic side but especially for the autonomic side. You can actually, with age, lose nerve tissue. We call that axon loss. I'm pointing to this blurry thing here that reminds me to tell you that actually losing nerves, we call that axon loss, because the nerves are sort of a cell body connected by an axon for a distance to another nerve or a muscle cell. And if you lose those nerve cells, if the axons go away, there is going to be less effective influence on the end organ. And it just happens as we get older. Are there ways to slow that down? There probably are. Are there ways to enhance and perhaps accentuate the remaining nerves, the remaining axons at any given time? Yes, and we'll talk about those things. And the second way that the nervous system can screw up as we get older is dysregulation. Dysregulation, and these two things are not entirely separate, right? As you lose nerve tissue, as you lose nerve cells, it becomes more difficult to regulate the function of the sympathetic side or the parasympathetic side or both. And the net effect of that is that the organs that were relying on very precise, tight regulation start misbehaving. It's kind of like I just got back home here in Scottsdale today. I took a flight, and I was thinking while I was on the plane about what we were going to talk about. And I was thinking, well, it's sort of like what we're saying here is it's sort of like an automatic pilot on an airplane. As long as it's functioning well, it makes very subtle, small adjustments as the plane is flying to keep it flying at the right altitude, in the right direction, at the right speed. But if the automatic pilot starts to not regulate those elements of flight the way it should, pretty soon the plane's bouncing all over the place and no one wants to be on it anymore. Well, it's kind of like that with our own nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is kind of like an autopilot, if you will. And if it gets dysregulated, no one wants to be on the plane, right? And so that, I think, is a pretty good analogy. But let's talk about overactive bladder for a second, because it's kind of a canary in the coal mine for autonomic dysregulation, right? Because it's such a common occurrence among individuals whose autonomic nervous systems aren't working well. And examples of that are the fact that it is often a presenting symptom in individuals that are developing neurologic diseases like Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis. Often the very first complaint that brings a person to the doctor is bladder dysfunction. It might be overactive bladder. It might be inability to empty the bladder effectively. But it is an early symptom of autonomic dysfunction in the context of a disease state, a degenerative neurologic disease state. But aging itself can be considered a degenerative neurologic disease state, right? We've got lots of documentation on this, right? I always say nothing good comes from aging, except hopefully our sense of humor improves, because everybody's going to need it, right? And so if we often develop bladder symptoms without a diagnosis of an autonomic degenerative disease, but it can just be simply the consequence of aging. But there's more to it than that even. A lot of us, like all of us, live abnormal lives. And you might say to yourself, that's not true. I'm a normal person. I live a normal life. I don't do extreme things. I don't abuse my body. I live a normal life. No, you don't. You don't. You live a life that involves the internet. I know, because you're watching me on the internet right now. You live a life that involves abnormal ability to access information. All information, all the time. You are constantly under a barrage of stimulation that your brain was not designed to accommodate. And there's consequences to this. There are consequences that are reflected, guess what, by the autonomic nervous system. And they basically amount to something that has been called the chronic stress response. Chronic stress response. And what that means is when your autonomic nervous system gets stuck in a sympathetic dominant state, too much sympathetic, right? What does that do? Fight, flight, right? Those are the activities that are often attributed to sympathetic dominant state, and it was designed to be there, and it's good. If you're getting chased by a tiger, you want your sympathetics to work well. But if you get stuck in that state, it's designed for temporary accommodation of biological needs of an organism that's in danger or is threatened somehow, and it provides for excellent short-term responsiveness, and then it is normally able to regress back into a nice, more parasympathetic dominant resting state until the next demand arises that is a threat or a stress of some kind. Our lives, the way we live, are so stimulating to the sympathetic nervous system that we are all somewhat stuck in a sympathetic dominant state. That's called the chronic stress response. It's not good for you. Now, we use the word stress kind of casually, don't we? We use it to mean different things. I'm all stressed out. We say to ourselves, I've got money stress, work stress, marriage stress, I've got kids stress. We've got 100 reasons to be stressed. But what does it really mean? What we're talking about is stress as defined by a physiologist. And the chronic stress response involves, obviously, too much sympathetic output, but there's a couple of different avenues that can manifest through. One, straight up increase nerve impulses from the sympathetic nerves that go to the heart and the blood vessels that raise your heart rate, raise your blood pressure, make you feel anxious. And that's a very immediate response. It shunts blood from the surface of the skin to the muscles. It takes blood from the gut to the muscles so that you can run away or fight as you may need to survive as an organism. But if you get stuck there, that's not good, right? Your gut needs blood supply, and you can't live chronically out of autonomic balance. But a lot of us do. I would say that most all of us do. It affects our sleep. It affects our mood. If you look at depression and anxiety, both of these can manifest because of a chronic stress response. How common are those things? Exceedingly common. But there's subtle ways it affects us as well. One of the key things associated with human satisfaction is the ability to express yourself creatively. Your creative expression. It's going to be different than mine, but it is unique to you, and it is the application of your God-given innate talents that is necessary for satisfaction, for a happy person, right? And our creative potential can be blunted if we're stuck in that chronic stress response, right? And so there are a number of ways it affects us, that it affects our quality of life and even our quantity of life. The chronic stress response is associated with hypertension. Hypertension is associated with coronary heart disease. Coronary heart disease is associated with being dead. The number one killer of human beings, kills more people than cancer, atherosclerotic coronary heart disease, and peripheral vascular disease, because stroke also kills lots of people, are clearly associated with the chronic stress response. And the other arm of the chronic stress response is sort of the slower arm that involves the release of cortisol from the adrenal glands that in the short term is very good for getting away from a tiger that's chasing you, but long term screws up your metabolism, gives you metabolic syndrome, right? Insulin resistance, unfavorable cholesterol levels, obesity, hypertension, and again, that leads to chronic disease, leads to diabetes, leads to atherosclerotic coronary heart disease and peripheral vascular disease. So this chronic stress response is epidemic. You need to understand that. It is perhaps a response you could anticipate based on this freak show of a lifestyle all of us live with. But the good news is there's things you can do to kind of counter it if you would just understand the role the autonomic nervous system is playing and the fact that we have to find a way to live more healthfully, to have the kind of quality of life that we should have, that we have the potential to have. It's just that our environment's abnormal. That's all. And so again, the bladder can kind of serve as a canary in the coal mine for what's going on with the autonomic nervous system. The uh, if you're developing overactive bladder, well, do you have other symptoms of autonomic dysfunction? Let's kind of move this around because I'm going to go on to a look at that. There we go. I can work backwards. Um, the third point, which is directly behind me, and basically, what it's pointing out is that it's not as simple as everything I've just stated. When you're in a chronic stress response, most of your organ systems are getting too much sympathetic tone. But guess what? The amount of autonomic input, sympathetic and parasympathetic, to different organ systems is different. Of course it is, because everything's more complicated than it should be. And the bladder often has an opposite response to stress, right? If it was just about everything having too much sympathetic input, you'd never pee or wouldn't be able to pee when you're super stressed out, right? But it's actually people feel the urge to urinate more and sometimes wet their pants if they're scared enough, right? And that's a parasympathetic effect. When you say, well, wow, I'm stressed, I have too much sympathetic input. Why is my bladder exhibiting a parasympathetic response? Well, it's just paradoxical. And it's the way your bladder works, for better or worse. Stress is associated with a parasympathetic dominant state in the bladder. You remember your parasympathetics, S2, 3, 4, cause the bladder to contract and empty. Your sympathetics, T10 to L2, cause the bladder to stay nice and relaxed. And so what you really need is to achieve a state of balance, right? A state of balance between the two. And that day is easy to say, hard to do, right? And so, you know, exercise is one of the things that establishes that balance. Activity, because every time one of your muscles contracts, right? That's on the somatic side. You're doing weightlifting or curls or something. Every time your bicep contracts, it sends a signal to the brain, an afferent signal that influences your autonomic nervous system in a favorable way. Every time your quadriceps or your glutes or any other muscle group contracts, right? The nerve that made that muscle contract is a two-way street. One lane is the motor lane that tells the muscle to fire. The other is the afferent lane, which tells the brain the muscle has fired. You can feel it. And the reason you can feel it is because of the afferent signal from the muscle to the brain. Well, if we don't get enough of those the way we were designed to, because we used to be super active, trying not to die while living in a cave and running around all the time, we have a nervous system that is designed for that level of activity. But now we sit at a desk and we watch Netflix and eat pizza. And well, you know, our nervous system and metabolism and physiology wasn't designed for that. So guess what happens? We get sick when we do that. We get sick when we do that. So that's really a key thing, is a enough physical activity. And then there's this other element of aging that we need more research on, but there is data to suggest that the sympathetic and parasympathetic sides of the autonomic nervous system don't age at the same rate. That the sympathetics kind of poop out sooner than the parasympathetics, and you end up too parasympathetic dominant in organs like the bladder, and that's why overactive bladder is more common with age. The prevalence increases, right, over the course of your life. You know, and finally, there's this issue of autonomic responsiveness. So whatever the resting state of autonomic balance an organ is experiencing, right? We're talking about the bladder, but we could be talking about the heart, the lungs, or blood pressure, the arterioles, whatever resting state it's in is only one aspect of how well the autonomic nervous system is working. The other is how responsive is the system to the demands being placed on it by daily activity, right? Can you increase the parasympathetic if you need to? Or can you increase the sympathetic if you need to? How quickly responsive is it to your needs? And so I drew a picture to try and explain this in a way that would make sense. So let's look at that for a second. So look at this. You see this? I have a prop here. It's a rubber band. It's a rubber band. This right here, that's a normal rubber band. That's a rubber band in balance. And it looks like this, right? It's not stretched too much and it's not too unstretched. It's not too relaxed, if you will, right? Here, over here, that's a rubber band that is too relaxed. And over here, that's a rubber band that is too stretched, right? So this normal state is autonomic balance, right? This is sympathetic dominance. Where are you going to go from here if you have a new demand that requires a burst of sympathetic performance? You're going to break the rubber band, right? And that might be equivalent to a heart attack or a stroke, right? But you don't have the same responsiveness you have if you're starting in a normal balanced state. And if the rubber band is too relaxed, right? Again, you can apply a little more sympathetic tone, but it's still not going to be stretched. And so just like skeletal muscle fiber, where the actin and myosin overlap, if the muscle is chronically contracted, like in a trigger point or a high tone pelvic floor, and there's too much overlap, well, how's that muscle going to contract? There's nowhere to go vis-a-vis sliding of the actin and myosin chains over each other, right? There's nowhere left to go to make it contract, so it's not responsive anymore. The nervous system is kind of like that, right? To have a range of responsivenesses, which is what you need to live healthfully and happily, you need to be in a balanced state. So the amount of sympathetic and parasympathetic input to the bladder, for instance, it isn't just about the state it's in at any given moment, but it is how readily it can accommodate further filling of the bladder without contracting on its own and causing you to wet your pants. And so I think that if you're like me, you're well impressed that this is really important, right? And it's way bigger than whether you pee your pants or not, right? It has to do with everything that gives your life value and quality. And you should pay attention to it. You should be thinking right now, well, how do I know? Even if I don't have overactive bladder, how do I know if I'm in autonomic balance? That is a legitimate question. And there are some ways, there are some things you can do to kind of get an idea about whether your overall autonomic state and responsiveness is healthy. One is something called orthostasis, which means when you stand up from a seated position or stand up from after laying down for a while in a relaxed state, is your heart rate and blood pressure responsive in a way that keeps you from getting dizzy? Or is there an exaggerated acceleration of your heart rate when that happens, which can be caused by a number of different things, including things like dehydration or blood loss? But I'm assuming most of you are not experiencing acute blood loss right now, and hopefully you're not dehydrated. And so you can measure your heart rate and or blood pressure while seated, and then stand up, measure it again. And if you find that the heart rate is increasing more than it ought to, or if your blood pressure is not increasing as much as it ought to, or if it makes you feel dizzy, that's some indication that the autonomic nervous system isn't responsive in the way that it should be, but it's just one test. There's another test that everybody has access to now that no one used to have access to, called heart rate variability. There are a ton of really not very expensive wearables you can get right now that will calculate the variability in your heart rate. Now, what does that mean? It's basically measuring the time between successive heartbeats and comparing them to each other. And if there's a wide range in terms of how much time exists between individual heartbeats, that's good and healthy and speaks to a fit autonomic nervous system. But if your heart rate variability drops and becomes low, 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 that's a risk factor for death. For one, sudden coronary death due to arrhythmia, for instance, is a very common cause of human demise. And so heart rate variability seems to be clearly associated, low heart rate variability, clearly associated with risk of dying. It is a measurement of autonomic fitness. So, if you weren't convinced before, hopefully you are certainly convinced now. There's other things, though, as well. What's your resting heart rate? An elevated resting heart rate above 100 beats per minute is indicative of too much sympathetic tone, right? And chronic anxiety can create that. Lots of things can create that. It's not necessarily a function of the autonomic nervous system, but when taken in the context of many other data points like orthostasis, heart rate variability, do you have overactive bladder, resting heart rate might be indicative of a autonomic imbalance. Irritable bowel syndrome. Well, that really reflects a disruption in the gut's ability to peristalse the way it ought to. Well, what determines that? I'll wait while you think of. Obviously, it's the autonomic nervous system in proper balance, leaving room for the sympathetic and parasympathetic to adjust, right? Creating responsiveness and range. The gut works normally, but constipation or diarrhea can be the consequence of autonomic imbalance affecting the gut. Do you have those things? Might reflect an overall dysregulation, right? Poor regulation of the autonomic nervous system. Overactive bladder, we've talked about, and a sexual dysfunction, right? This is another quality of life issue regulated by the autonomic nervous system. Arousal requires you to be in a parasympathetic, relaxed state, but orgasm requires you to be in a sympathetic dominant state. And the ability to switch from parasympathetic dominant to sympathetic dominant requires, you got it, responsiveness of the autonomic nervous system. You can't be stuck sympathetic dominant and somehow get sexually aroused. Likewise, you can't be stuck parasympathetic dominant and have an orgasm, right? And so you have to have an autonomic nervous system that can accommodate to the needs as they arise. Anyway, I hope that's interesting for you. It sure is for me, and I've just been trying so hard to convey my interest and passion for educating people about this issue, and I will keep trying to do so, and perhaps even get a whiteboard that isn't blurry someday. I'll try. If you have questions, it'd be awesome for you to write them in the comment section. And while you're doing that, I'll say just a few words in closing about what are the kinds of things you can do to improve your autonomic nervous system health. Well, the first thing you can do is use your autonomic nervous system, right? That old phrase, use it or lose it, just is true in so many ways in human health and physiology. But you can use it by creating stress, physiologic stress for short periods of time, and then allow your nervous system to regress back into a more parasympathetic dominant state. For instance, high intensity interval training is pretty much the perfect exercise for pushing the range of your autonomic nervous system. Get that heart rate up into your ideal heart rate range, right? I believe, what is it? 220 minus your age, and you want to like try and get to 80% of that. Confirm that with Chat GPT, but I'm pretty sure that's how you do it. Heather would know. And so doing that and then allowing your heart rate to come back down, not sitting in a chair, right, but just decreasing the intensity of your exercise until you come back down 20, 30 beats per minute, and then doing it again and doing that over and over and over, 7 or 8 cycles a day. Like you got to exercise every day, no matter what disease state we're talking about in medicine. Exercise good, right? Exercise is the first thing, right? I can't think of a single one, whether we're talking about psychiatry and people with depression, what should exercise? Oh, okay. What you're talking about, aging and heart disease, what should you do? Exercise. Yeah, that's true. When we're talking about pelvic floor disorders, what should you exercise? Movement. Yeah, you should do it. When we're talking about metabolic disorder, yeah, exercise. Diabetes, exercise. Every disease everybody could possibly manifest should include exercise as a remedy. And that's another indication that we just live these freakishly abnormal lives, sedentary lives. There is no way a prehistoric human could have survived just sitting at their desk in their cave, just waiting for Uber Eats to swing by. And, it's right. It was very strenuous, active lives. And probably a lot of people died of trauma doing dangerous things. But the fact of the matter is that's how our physiology was designed. And so when we don't have normal challenges to our physiology, then or to the autonomic nervous system, it kind of gets complacent, and you can get stuck in an either sympathetic dominant or parasympathetic dominant state, and you don't want that, right? You don't want that. We talk about it in terms of the bladder, but it affects the entire body, including your mental state, which obviously is very important. I hope it's been interesting. I hope so. Anyway, let us know what you want to hear about in the future. We're here to serve you. Check out Pilates.com, Pilates.com. Check out our YouTube channel, The Pelvic Floor Solution. We have a Facebook page just for people dealing with prolapse, power over prolapse. You can search that on Facebook. You'll find our page. You may be watching this live stream right now from our Facebook page. If that's true, good on you. And we